Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm starting a reading vlog where I'm going to be reading a bunch of books that have been recommended by Becca at ReadBecca, who I'll link below. Becca, a couple of months ago, did a TBR based on books that I'd recommended, and I thought that that would be such a fun idea to do a similar thing. So in this reading vlog, I'm going to be picking up a bunch of books that I've heard her talk about on her channel that I've been wanting to read. I have so many books on my TBR based on Becca's recommendations. I've chosen 5 to start with, but I do have a couple of others on hold at the library, so we'll see. I might add more as I go along. But the 5 that I'm going to be starting with at least are The City of the Plague God by Sarwat Chadda, which is a middle grade contemporary fantasy in the Rick Riordan Presents line. And Becca said this was absolutely excellent, so I'm always interested in reading great middle grade. The next is Fluff by Ravens Dagger, which is, I believe, like a self-published lit RPG. I've never read any lit RPG, but Becca said this was super kind of low stakes and cozy and has this kind of main character who is a villain but doesn't really want to be a villain. And it just sounds ridiculous and sweet and super gentle, which I love. Next is None by the Righteous by Chantal James, and this I almost completely forget what it's about other than Becca loves this. I think it's a literary work that has some interesting themes about maybe death and spirituality, something like that, but don't quote me on that. We will see as I read into it. Next is How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur, who is one of the creators involved in The Good Place, which is a TV series I adore. And this is all about kind of moral, ethical questions. I've got this on audiobook, and Becca said it was great on audio. And lastly, I've got Dress Codes by Richard Thompson Ford, which I also have on audio. This is a book about the history of laws and regulations and codes related to what you can wear, and it's supposed to have a really interesting political and social kind of lens to analyze that with. So I'm really excited about that as well. So these are the 5 books that I'm going to at least start with. I might add in more as we go. I'm really excited about these. So I will check in with you as I start reading them and put in clips of things as I do my life. So I hope that you will enjoy coming along with me. Okay, so I have started reading some of the books, so I thought I would check in with you. I'm now at 66% in How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur, and this is such a fun audiobook. It is just basically Michael Schur talking about moral philosophy, going over a lot of the big schools of moral philosophy in Western philosophy, and making them very relatable in an everyday sense, and talking about how he got into that, and how he thought about it, and also making some connections to how it was used in The Good Place. The audiobook has a couple of the actors from The Good Place who come in and read little like quotes or titles here and there. Nothing big, but just little bits of flavor every once in a while. But this is just such an easy audiobook to listen to. It's really enjoyable. Michael Schur is a very approachable kind of narrator, and the questions he's talking about are really just how to be a good person. And he relates it to things like, do you really have to return that shopping cart back to the store? Can't you just leave it in the parking lot since they have somebody who will come and get it? And like a lot of those everyday types of questions, but also just explain some of the, big theories and concepts within moral philosophy and where they come from and how they interact with each other and how they apply and all that sort of stuff. So it's really fascinating, but also pretty funny and lighthearted. And so it's just such an easy audiobook to listen to. So I'm really enjoying that one. I've also started The City of the Plague God by Sarwat Chadda, and this one I struggled with just a little bit. I'm only 9% in, but the chapter that I just read had a lot of gross stuff. So the plague god kind of showed up, and he's covered in like flies and maggots and stuff like that, and I'm just like, oh my god, that is so gross. I know kids love gross stuff, so I think that it's not necessarily wrong for a middle grade to have that, but for me, I'm just like a little grossed out. But I talked to Becca, and she said that there's not much of that in the rest of the book, so I'm gonna keep reading, and hopefully we'll get more into like the action and adventure and less into the grossness of the plague god. But the main character is super relatable, super likable in the first couple chapters. He's just really earnest. His older brother is gone. He misses him, dealing with grief, and he's really trying to hold his family deli together. And so we're just getting his perspective in this kid who's just very earnest and trying to do what's right. So it's very interesting. And then he just suddenly has this stuff that is happening to him and to his deli, and he has to protect them. So I'm looking forward to continuing with this one. I also picked up a picture book that wasn't on my original TBR, but is something that I'd had on hold at the library after hearing Becca talk about it, and that is The Phone Booth in Mr. Hirota's Garden by Heather Smith, illustrated by Rachel Wada. And this is a really, really lovely picture book that deals with some pretty heavy themes of grief, but in a super approachable way for a picture book audience. And it is inspired by some real events in Japan that happened after the 2011 tsunami killed a lot of people, and there was a guy who had a phone booth in his garden that he'd been using to deal with some grief. So that's like the real story. And in this version of it, it's a different person who happens to be friends with this little boy, and they both lose someone in the tsunami and kind of process that grief by talking in a phone that doesn't really connect to anything. Oh, it's so beautiful. I thought it was beautifully written. I thought that the artwork was just phenomenal. And yeah, I love Becca's picture book recommendations, so I'm really glad I got to this one. I will go ahead and continue reading things. I've actually had a couple of other books come in on holds that I have requested because of Becca's recommendations. So if I get to those during this vlog, I'll include them as well. Okay, so I have read a little bit more, so I thought I would check in again. I, first of all, finished How to Be Perfect, and that was such a good audiobook. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. The last section of the book, too, just had so many interesting topics in it. It talked about things like existentialism, what that really is. It talked about also things like problematic favorites, like how do you deal with the morality, the ethics of liking some sort of author or kind of person who's creating things where you later learn that there's quite some issues related to them. And Michael Schur like kind of shares some of his own experiences with that and like his comedy influences and how he had to reconcile that with who they are as people. So just really great discussions all around. I think it did get just a little repetitive towards the end. And I think I was expecting slightly more humor throughout, but even so, just a really thoroughly enjoyable book. Tons of interesting topics about moral philosophy. Learned a bunch and just had such a good time. So this was an excellent read. Then I did make a little bit more progress on The City of the Plague God. And yeah, Becca was totally right. Like I read more, and as soon as we're not with the Plague God, it's not gross at all. It's just full of action and mythology and all sorts of cool things. We meet some other gods and just like some really cool weapons and all sorts of interesting history stuff. So I am very, very much loving the entire feel of the book. Again, I really like the main character. I also like some of the interesting discussions that are being brought up in this. Just things like a little bit about Islamophobia, about reclaiming of words like jihad, and also some very interesting discussion about these mythological Persian gods for a boy who is Muslim and what that means and how he reconciles that with his belief in God. And so that was just a really fascinating part of this as well. So I'm 27% into this and very much interested in continuing. Then I started a couple more books. I started Dress Codes by Richard Thompson Ford, and this is so good so far. So I'm listening to this on audiobook and I am 24% in, and it is just fascinating. So basically, the author of this is a legal historian type of person. He looks at a lot of stuff related to critical race theory and takes this very social justice lens to analyze the way that dress codes have been used throughout history to sort of regulate people in society and often bring them back in line, and how people have used the kind of form of dress to make statements or to show their individuality, and how laws have tried to curtail that. And so he's talking about all kinds of really, really interesting things. Really, he starts kind of around the Elizabethan era, and when there were sumptuary laws, which were basically like, if you're not a lord or a lady, you can't wear nice clothes. But he also talks about like religious wear, so like nuns' habits and kind of how that came about, and also some of the reforms that have been made and a lot of the rules around that. And he talks also about some things like how certain items of fashion have been outlawed at one point and then have become normalized, or vice versa. And so he talks especially about how a lot of the Jewish population in Europe, there were laws about what Jewish women had to wear to like mark them as Jewish. And so in some areas it was something like there were some Jewish women who tended to wear earrings, but that wasn't common in that era. And so then it became a law that Jewish women had to wear earrings to mark them out as Jewish, until later when earrings just became kind of popular all over, and then that was no longer a thing. And so there's so much about this, about how dress codes and laws are used to really enforce societal rank and enforce a lot of rules and structure, and put certain groups down or lift other groups up. And so it's just fascinating. And then the other book that I started is Fluff by Ravens Dagger, and this is something that I have already gotten to 67% in. I just started it the other day and it's so good. I'm so enjoying it. So this is a lit RPG, which I've never read before, and I don't know that I ever would have just picked it up on my own, but Becca had said such good things about this that I was like, let me give this a shot. And lit RPG is basically where the characters in the book are basically playing like an RPG, a role-playing game, and so you get like their stats, and there's some form of them leveling up and gaining new powers and stuff like that. I kind of think maybe I need to read more of this genre because this is so good. I don't know if all of the other books in this genre will be this good, but this one is so good. And I'm actually really liking that lit RPG aspect of it as well, especially because I love Gloomhaven. And so I think if you like those kind of role-playing games, there's quite a bit in this that's really fun for you as a reader. But beyond that, it is just so much fun. Becca described this as sort of like if you wanted to like hench but just didn't like the tone of that, which is exactly what happened to me, that this would work for you. And it's so true. It's super sweet, it's super cozy and gentle. We have a main character who ends up gaining powers, and she's gained villain powers, but she's like, what? No, I just want to be a normal person. And so she's trying to go about figuring out how to not be a villain and how to keep that secret from people. And she's got these powers to summon these sisters, but they're basically like minions, henchmen, right? And these sisters are just really hilarious. Her first one is a girl who can transform into a bear, and she's so funny. I love her character. I love their dynamic. And it's just like, it's wholesome and fun, and also has some like interesting kind of commentary on the society that they're in, and like, are heroes really heroic, and how is the system set up, and all that sort of stuff. So I'm loving this, and I can't wait to finish it. It's so good. Okay, so that is where I am in my reading right now, but I will check in again with you guys once I have read a little bit more. Okay, so I read a little bit more, so I wanted to check in with you. I did finish a couple of books. So the first was Fluff by Ravens Dagger, which was so good. I just thoroughly enjoyed reading this entire book. It was so much fun. I loved the kind of superhero stuff. I loved also seeing the way that the main character sort of develops and changes throughout the course of the book. I am super interested in continuing to read on with this. It looks like there is a second book in this series, except that it's been published in like a chapter by chapter format online. It hasn't been yet ported over to like an ebook by the author. And I don't know, I don't generally just read things online, but I'm kind of tempted because I just want to keep staying in this world. It's so good. In fact, I was so just raving about how much I loved this to Sush, my husband, that he ended up picking it up and also finishing it really quickly and loving it. So it gets really a big thumbs up from both of us. We absolutely loved this book. I also finished City of the Plague God by Sarwat Chadda, and this was so cool. I think the mythology in this is just outstanding. I really, really loved learning about all of these different gods and also these classic sort of weapons and monsters and all sorts of things. So a lot of this is kind of bringing some of the mythology from things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, stuff like that in, and it's just the coolest mythology. So if you like that kind of thing, you'll love it in here. I also really ended up loving the main character. He is just the sort of person who isn't trying to be a hero. He's just doing whatever he needs to do to help the people he loves about. You know, his parents get sick from this plague that is caused by the plague god, and all he wants to do is just save them. And, you know, a lot of this is him working through his grief over having lost his older brother before. And he forms this really great friendship with Bellet, who is this girl that is totally a fighter. She's a big fighter, and it's interesting to see their dynamic, and it's interesting for our main character to not be a fighter at all. Whenever possible, he runs away from fights or he tries to use his wits to get out of them, and I loved that in the main character. And I loved the way that he processes a lot of grief and dealing with things around him. I think though that every time any of the monsters, like the plague monster, showed up, it did get kind of gross for me. I think 10-year-olds would love it, but I have a much weaker stomach than 10-year-olds, I think. This really did have kind of verging on body horror type of grossness to just the monsters and everything like that. So that part was not for me, but everything else about the story I thought was really, really cool. And I just loved the themes and the discussions and the mythology in it. And yeah, it was a super cool book. Then I did make progress on dress codes. I am now at 81% and loving this book. This is so fascinating. I really like this look at fashion and the way that it interacts with rules and legislation from a lawyer's perspective. The number of cases that are brought up of people being prosecuted for what they're wearing, or for people bringing suits against employers for dress codes that they feel are biased or unfair. It's just so cool to hear about all these legal aspects of dress codes. And I love how he talks about really the way that these dress codes are used to enforce societal rules, and how often people are trying to use the way that they dress to express who they are as individuals, and the kind of conflict there. And he brings up so many different social structures, so things like racism and sexism and how that plays in. Things like, for example, with sexism and with gender, he talks about how there's all of this legislation and all of these people fighting against rules that, you know, determine which genders can wear which items of clothing. So like in a lot of schools, which have school dress codes, where non-binary kids or trans kids or whatever, they want to wear different things, and how sometimes schools will crack down on that while also pretending that that's not what they're cracking down on, or how often these school dress codes are not uniformly kind of enforced. So girls will often, especially BIPOC girls, will often get the brunt of it, even though you still have boys and other people who are breaking the dress codes too. They're just not enforced. So there's so many cool things. There's like a really cool discussion about high heels that I thought was fascinating. The history of it being for men, but then it became something for women, and how for women, just the idea of having to wear heels or not wearing heels and what that means in the business place, and all sorts of cool stuff. So I just love the discussion of societal issues examined through a legal lens looking at clothing. It is just fascinating. I am thoroughly enjoying all of the discussions in this, and I can't wait to finish this one. And then lastly, I just started None But the Righteous by Chantal James. I'm at about 14% right now, and I'm just loving the feel of this book. It's very atmospheric, very lyrical, very poetic. This is literary fiction, and so a lot of it really is about the writing and about kind of the connections to characters, but I'm not 100% sure what the plot is yet. We're following a young man who has been through some rough times, and we're doing this through the view of a spirit who basically keeps taking over his body. But it seems like the spirit is really helping him disassociate when he's going through trauma. And so it's really interesting. There's a lot of lines in this that are just really beautifully written, so I'm very interested in continuing and seeing where this goes. Okay, so that's where I am right now with the books. I'm really having such a good time with this reading project. I have just a little bit more to go, and then I will finish these books and check in with you one last time. Okay, so I finished reading everything and I wanted to do one last check-in with you guys. So I finished Dress Codes by Richard Thompson Ford, and I think I forgot to mention it's narrated by Bill Andrew Quinn, and I think the narrator did a great job. This book ended just as strongly as it went throughout. It is just fascinating topics. The last section really looked at many of the modern sort of unstated dress codes, but where there's still expectations. A lot of really interesting things about like cultural appropriation, so many different cool topics. So that was just such a cool nonfiction book. If you have any interest in sort of microhistory or social justice or anything like that, I think this book was really, really cool to pick up. And then I also finished None But the Righteous by Chantal James, and this is really interesting. So this is literary fiction, and it was so beautifully written. I just found myself highlighting so many different passages. The poetry of the language is really, really strong. And as it came together, it was so interesting. I think that I'm not very good at understanding all of the meaning in a lot of literary fiction, so I don't think that I got all of this book, but it kind of comes together in a really interesting way where the main character, like I said, he's sort of somebody who struggles to be in his own body, and he has this spirit that'll often kind of take control of him almost, and live through him when he's not able to be in himself. But also, we're dealing with a lot of other questions about the world around him, and in particular, he comes from New Orleans, and the further into the book we get, the more that we learn about his connections there, and this is told in the span of a year after Hurricane Katrina. And so the sort of destruction of his home and the spaces there, the spaces within him, the way that water is used, there's so much imagery in this and a lot of things that I just don't think that I fully unpacked, but it was really beautifully written and really fascinating the way that it talked about how at home we are in our own homes, in our own bodies, and how separate we are. And it just so many really cool themes and beautiful language, even if I didn't fully get all of it. And then I did actually read one more quick thing that I had checked out, which was Borders by Thomas King, illustrated by Natasha Donovan. So this is a graphic novel that is about a family, a mom, her kind of adult daughter, and teenage son. And the adult daughter has left where they live on a Blackfoot reservation north of the American border, so in Canada, has gone down to Salt Lake City to live. And the mom and the brother are trying to go visit her, but they get stopped by the border police because the mom, when they ask her citizenship, she says Blackfoot, and she refuses to say, American or Canadian or anything like that. And so it's this whole graphic novel just about this interaction. It's a very narrow focus, which was interesting, although I think maybe it was a little longer than it needed to be for the scope of what the story was. And I just thought it was just that very interesting question of where do you belong and what are you going to say when somebody questions that? And even if you know that you're right about your citizenship. But yeah, it was just, I really liked the illustration. I really liked the event that it kind of portrays. I liked the narrowness of that scope, and it was just a really interesting graphic novel. Okay, so that is everything that I have read from this vlog that are books that I picked up because Becca at ReadBecca had recommended them. I think that this was a really successful reading project. I loved these books. All of them were so, so good. Some of these are also like new favorites of mine, like Fluff, and others I really recommend picking them up. Also, if you are not already subscribed to Becca, I think that if you like my channel, you will love her channel. She reads so eclectically, so widely, does excellent like weekly reading check-ins, does like all sorts of other things, participates in BookTube Prize, all sorts of things. So yeah, I think that Becca's taste is awesome. She reads so widely. It's not that necessarily everything she reads is stuff that I'll pick up, but all the things that appeal to me that she talks about and I pick up are just so, so good. So I feel like everybody can find something really interesting on her channel to read, and she also has like recommendations for other media to pick up. Like each week she'll talk about some of the BookTube videos she watched or other things that are like worth mentioning as recommendations. So yeah, she's always got great recommendations. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this vlog and enjoyed the books that I was picking up and everything like that. If you guys have read any of these, or if you're interested in them, you want to chat with me about anything, tell me about what you've been reading, or if you've read any books that Becca has recommended that you ended up loving or anything like that, I'd love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.